last year, if you were fortunate enough like me to be out fishing, found out it was a pretty good year. For trying to measure how well fishing is what is done is personally I like the getting my hands scaly. If I hit scales on my hands 2 or 3 days a week, then I know fishing's good. We try to use some other methods as well. Our charter boat fleet is required to submit monthly catch reports for every trip they book and run. And we've managed to collate the information. By me, I mean Rebecca Redmond from our office. And the charter boat fleet had a really good year in 2024. They catches overall increased by over 10,000 fish, from about 30,000 to over 40,000. Illinois sport catch for salmon and trout is driven by Coho, which is the blue bars. They make up most of what is caught, both in the sport and charter catch. And the biggest change is how fast they were catching fish last year, or catch rate, which is the green line on the graph. We haven't scaled to an actual number, so it's the number of fish caught for every 100 hours an angler fishes, or a group of anglers fish. And we went from 54 fish per 100 hours in 2023 to 71 fish per 100 hours in 2024. So it was a big jump. Again, most of that was driven by Coho. And from a reference standpoint, these numbers are for the last, correspond to the catch rate for the last 10 years. Long-term average is about 45 fish per 100 hours. So we've been well about that the last couple of years, but especially in 2024. Coho is the big driver. The charter catch increased by over 50% up from 2023. And in the sport creel from non-charter anglers, the boat fishery increased by over 20%. So everybody was getting in on the act. The charter catch went from about 19,000 fish to over 30,000. Most of our increase in catch was that. The catch rate went from in the mid 30s to over 50 fish per 100 hours. Again, not only the fish were biting, it seemed like survival was better, and there was more fish out there to pick from. We also have seen better returns in the fall to some of our DNR electrofishing sampling. Starting in mid-September, going into November, we take an electrofishing boat, a shock boat, around to all our stocking sites and a few other places, and we try to collect returning samples. And depending on how many we get, we come up with a rate of how many fish we get per hour shocking as opposed to hour fishing. And the last 3 years have been a noticeable jump up from what we've seen for about a decade before that. It appears the Coho are surviving better and returning back to Illinois harbors the last few years. Based on the number of fish that were being caught in the sport fishing last year, I kind of expected a little bit better return to our fall shocking last year, but it was still better than what we had seen previously, but not quite as good as the previous 2 years. Oh, we're not the only ones to get a big jump in harvest in 2024. Chinook salmon, almost 50% up in the charter fleet last year, over 30% up in the sport fishing group. Chinook catch in the charter harvest the last couple of years has been inching its way up. Again, we went over almost 1,000 up for last year. Say almost 50% catch rate, also going up. Some of that might have to do with stocking levels changing in the last few years as we're adding fish around the lake. For fall electrofishing, numbers have been relatively steady, but we've been slowly inching our way up in the last 5 or 6 years. One of the big drivers, what we saw last year, particularly on our fall electrofishing, is the 2023 year class or 2023 stocking of Chinook. These guys are spent 2 summers in the lake. 21 to 27 inch fish, 3 to 5, 3 to 7 pounds. They made up a big chunk of what we captured with the shock boat in the fall, over 50%. A lot of them were showing up, particularly later in the summer, in sport catches and charter boat catches. All the salmon that we electrofish, we pull aging structures from, and a good part of my winter is determining what age these fish are. Normally, in a given year, on average, the fish that have been out there for 2 summers, or 1+s as we call them, in the white bars, make up about 25%, thereabouts, of what we collect. Say this year they were over 50. And the fish that have been out 3 and 4 summers, they're full grown fish. They generally make up 2/3 or so of our catch. Things were different this year strictly because we saw a whole lot more of those 2023 year class or 2023 stocking of fish. Some of it is survival. This group seems to have done better than some of the ones before it, but also we put in more of them. Since Chinook salmon stocking, not just Illinois, but lake-wide over the last 25 years. And for a long time, we did nothing but decrease the number of fish. Year 2000, we were between 4 and 4.5 million fish, Chinook being stocked lake-wide. By 2017, we were down to about 1.4. So we had taken quite the drop. Again, trying to balance the number of predators out there versus how much prey base, namely alewife, is around for them to eat. Starting in 2020, we started adding fish back, which was the first time in my career that we actually increased Chinook stocking on a lake-wide basis. We did that because we thought there was more food for them. And then in 2023, we did it again. All the agencies, Illinois included, increased up to where we were almost back up in the 2.9 to 3 million range. So not quite back to where we were 25 years ago, but a lot more fish than we were in 2017. But anytime we talk about stocking, we worry about, do we have the food, do we have alewife for them? Alewife has been a challenge. My first field season as a biologist here was 1994, and we caught alewife in every net we sent. No matter where we put it, we had alewife. It was years before we had a net that I saw that didn't have an alewife in it. Over time, as the alewife population has declined, they've become harder to capture. A lot more, I call it patchy. It's a schooling fish. If you hit a school, you're likely going to find a bunch, but there's just a lot more space in between the schools. So a lot of times you may not be able to get a consistent measure how many there are, but when you do collect them, you can see, how big they are and, hopefully how old they are as well. We generally tend to look at 3 different sources for information on alewives. The U.S. Geological Survey does lake-wide trawling and acoustic or really expensive fish finder surveys. We do a spring gill net assessment using 8 different meshes, only which 3 of which are good for alewife, out of West Chicago and Waukegan. And then we let the fish tell us. For years, the only thing they need to do out there is eat. So we let them do the work and see what happens. Well, some of the survey results from last year from the USGS stuff, they dragged a bottom trawl at 7 different ports at a number of different depths, looking for all kinds of forage fish, including alewife. And their numbers for 2024 were similar, maybe slightly higher, 2023, but they didn't collect that. The acoustic assessment, the really good fish finder, those results are a little bit more volatile. They tend to bounce up and down more, but their trend is generally had been up the last few years, though they were down from 24 from 23. In our spring gillnet assessment, the numbers have been relatively consistent. Again, we get a lot of bouncing around, but the last few years, we've had fairly consistent numbers, maybe even a slight increase. One thing that has changed a little bit is that we're losing some of our older and larger alewife. 3 years ago, 2022, we had a bunch of alewife in the 8 to 9 inch range that were up to 8 or 9 years old. In 2023, we had fewer in that size range and nothing older than 8.7, but we had a good number in 8.7s. Last year, we had 1 8.7, and then nothing older than that. And again, fewer overall numbers. Just as an illustration, this is alewife catch rates from our April index survey. We split it between Chicago and Waukegan. It started in 1997, and up until 2005, it alternated between those two places. So every other year, you don't have any information. I put the catch rates on the red bars, which is the 1.5 inch mesh, which catches the most common size alewife at 6 to 7.5 inches long. For a while, we had good, consistent catches of alewife in all the meshes that we used until we got to 2005. And then we went a long time off Chicago, hardly catching any alewife at all. And then they started to come back. And in the last few years, we've been managed to catch not only decent numbers, but more sizes. Similar pattern in Waukegan without the lull. We never lost or went through a period where we weren't catching them like we did in Chicago. But the one thing that we were able to see in both places is we started to see after a long stretch where we saw very few of these bigger alewife in the 2 inch mesh, these 8 and 9 inch. These are ones that make big trout, big salmon. We started to see those again. And then for a few years, we had good numbers, and now they're starting to tail off again. So our third source that I like to look at is the Chinook. How do the Chinook tell us? These guys, guy and girl, swimming around for 4 summers. For most of that time, all they have to do is eat. That's their only job. So, if we struggle to find alewife, they should be better at it. So, look at what they're telling us. This is the average weight of a full-grown H3 female Chinook. It's been out there for 4 summers. This is agency-wide. This is all our fall electrofishing stuff combined with weir returns from Indiana, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And all combined to find what the average weight was over time. It goes back, I think it starts in 1986, and it's been tracked through all the stocking changes when we started cutting in the mid-90s down to where we got down to the lowest levels in the 20 teens. And then after we were a few years with those low levels of stocking, the average size of fish started to come up. And so up to a point in 2019 where this average was over 21 pounds, and it's the largest we had in the time series from going back to 1986. That's, this tells us that as far as food per individual, there was a lot out there. They didn't have to work hard. They fed well. So in 2020, we started adding Chinook back. So on the graph earlier, went from 1.4, 1.5 million to 2.5 million in 2020. 2022, it's over here. We're still at a pretty high level. We added some more. There was more discussion among the agency folks about how much. I don't know if people recall back that many years, but we had a small degree of alewife die-off in the spring and summer. Not so much down here. Northern Michigan had a bunch of it. And they got a lot of pressure up there from not necessarily fishermen, but for beachgoers and lakefront property owners who didn't like the alewife washing up on the beach, much like here many, many years ago. So Michigan added a bunch more Chinook in 2023. And they weren't alone. Say all the agencies did. We upped our stuff by about 16% as well, our Chinook stocking. But in the last 6 years or 5 years, that number is trending down the average size. Not hard to figure. We had decent numbers of alewife. We had built up more alewife stock because there was less demand eating it because we were stocking fewer fish, and we added predator demand to it. So they started eating the things down. All right, we're still at just under 17 pounds. We're still in a place where we think, things are good. But the trend is concerning. So it's something we're keeping an eye on. And then, if this trend continues, the next move on stocking would most likely be taking fish out as opposed to adding fish back. So we're seeing the alewife levels are consistent, but we've been adding predator demand. We increased stocking in 2023, but we're going to continue with those levels for at least 2024 and 2025. So the demand hasn't stabilized yet. We don't have 4 full year classes of Chinook and the other species out there eating, doing their stuff. So it's likely that the trend we're seeing that there's fewer fish per individual is likely going to continue. But that's why we'll stay out. We'll stay out looking and adjust stocking levels from there. Speaking of stocking levels, this is a list of the Chicago sites that we were able to stock in 2024. Our Cohos and Chinooks, Arley rainbows, brown trout, and Skamania steelhead are the suite of fish that the Illinois hatchery system puts out. And then stuff not in Chicago. All told, we were 700 some odd thousand. It was a rough year for our hatchery system. We had trouble. Our target for 2024 was 300,000 coho, and we had a problem with them hatching. It wasn't an Illinois specific problem. Other states had issues as well. Not to the same degree to where we were only able to stock about 87 or 88,000 fish. So I expect the fall returns this year to reflect that. Not as many coho coming back. We were at half or less of the Chinook that we wanted to stock. Again, hatchery problems. The impact on the return fishery for that won't be as dramatic because they come back over generally 3 years as opposed to just 1. We made up a lot of the difference with Arley strain rainbows, which we haven't been stocking in great numbers. It'll be interesting to see how those factor into returns coming. in the next few years. And we also increased the Skamania and put them in places that we don't normally do, just because to try to fill in some of the return fishing. Our targets for 2025 remain the same. And again, our Chicago sites and non-Chicago, and the only caveat for this is we had coho issues again, not as severe. We're looking at about 250,000 instead of the 300. So the 3 sites will be pared down a little bit from the 100,000 fish goal. The hatchery, we were down on St. Patrick's Day, doing something that I had never done in my time. Is we were down with a group of volunteers from the Illinois Salmon Unlimited chapter, fin clipping brown trout, which is the first time we'd marked brown trout since we put tags in them back in the 80s. And maybe it'll allow us to see which fish are ours and which fish come down from Wisconsin or over from Indiana. The only reason we were able to do this is that we changed the strain of brown trout that we're planting. We have been planting Plymouth Rock strain, which spawned later in the year, and as a result are too small to clip in the March timeframe when the hatchery has staff available to help us out. So with these Crawford strains, they're bigger at the same time of year, so we're able to get those fish marked. While we were down there, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had one of their tagging trailers down there. They were adipose clipping and coated wire tag inserting into Coho. While we were there, they had done the Chinook the week before, so all of those will go into the lake as part of a lake-wide study come May. And it was nice, the Salmon Unlimited folks generally have a good turnout, but 50 was about as big as I can ever remember. There were some folks that have been there for longer than me, as well as obviously some young blood, some youngsters that was good to see. I think 18 of the 50 were first timers, so it was nice to see new interest in there. This is the guys we were clipping. Those are 4 to 5 inch browns, really pretty at that size. And then we were taking off the 2 ventral fins here. Hopefully those start showing up in the next few years. I got one more. Yellow perch. Little update. We're still catching perch. We're not catching a lot of them. But the ones we are catching are growing rather quickly. But unfortunately, there's not a lot of them coming in. We're not seeing a lot of them come in. Our catches from our adult spawning assessment at the end of May have been relatively stable at low levels for the last number of years. Our same catch, looking for this year's hatch. We have not caught many since 2015. Well, we did see a few in 2021 and 2020, which made up most of what we did manage to catch in our nets in that spawning assessment.